There's a lot of interesting biases about boundaries. What actually constitutes a boundary? Is it a masculine thing or a feminine thing? Why is this tension as if it is something that is almost like it's a hostile thing to those that is experiencing the limits of it? It's interesting how boundaries has gotten controversial. So I thought we would talk about what boundaries are and how it relates to abusive relationships in particular, because it's something that is woven in and an integral part that is part and parcel. You can't really separate out abuse from boundaries because abusiveness is actually a severe infraction of a boundary. So let's start out with first just identifying what is a boundary. When we say that, what are we meaning? Because, for the longest time, I really didn't get it. We don't talk about it a lot. There's not a lot of explanation. So let's start first with a definition of a boundary, and then we can move to how it ties into abusive behavior. So by the way, let me introduce myself because that makes more sense to explain why I'm starting where I'm starting. I'm a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience, and I primarily talk about narcissistic abuse, but I've had all this experience working with patients in the practice and working with all sorts of variety of issues through those 20 years where I saw private patients. I saw mostly adults, although I saw adolescents, and I was trained to see children as well. But what I noticed is that, let's first go back to boundaries. What are boundaries? So when a baby is born, it doesn't have its sense of itself as a separate self. It sees itself, but literally, when it is being created, it is connected to the mother through the umbilical cord. So it is dependent. It is actually a parasitic relationship, a symbiotic relationship in which the baby needs the mother in order to, it's parasitic because the mother doesn't need the baby. Symbiotic would mean they depend on each other. It's a parasitic relationship. The mother doesn't depend on the baby for anything, but the baby uses the mother's resources in order to grow. And it is part of the mother, and it doesn't even see itself as separate. It just is part of this dyad, this two people situation. And then it's born and the cord's cut, and the baby now for the first time in its life is actually separate. It's its own individual, but it doesn't have a sense of itself as separate because it is incredibly fragile, and it depends on the mother or the caretaker, whoever's taking care of it, for everything, for all its basic needs. It can't even roll over. It's completely dependent on the goodness, on the well-meaning of the parent. Very, very dependent. It still sees itself as something that is part of the mother. Or the primary caretaker sees itself as not really separate. It doesn't recognize separateness until about the time that you see separation anxiety appear. When the baby's about maybe 4, 5, 6 months and the mother walks out of the room and the infant gets scared. That's really for the first time when the infant is aware that people can leave me. I'm dependent on this person's goodness staying in my life to take care of me, and they actually can abandon me. And that's a big, huge revelation, and there's intense anxiety about that. And then it begins to realize that there are other people, that just not mother, but although it's recognized father and other, maybe the siblings in the family, but it starts to recognize strangers from familiar. So there's the next big anxiety. And then all of this is happening, one of the things it becomes aware of is that it has a sense that people can overwhelm itself, herself or himself, that people can be too close in their space. You know how you've seen adults get in a baby and pinch his cheeks and they're right in their face and the baby kind of recoils, has a sense of that there's too much intensity, but also there's a sense of people can walk out of the room and leave them crying or leave them hungry, leave them wet, all sorts of things like that. So there's a sense of engulfment that can be suffocated or overwhelmed, and it also can be that people can leave. And that's the first kind of experience of boundariedness, in the sense of overwhelming and loss or separation. And it just gets more sophisticated as we turn into adults and grow up. Our sense of who we are and people's in relationship to us, it gets more sophisticated. We realize that we have a body and that people can intrude that body and touch it without our permission, or we can keep everybody away and not let anyone have any contact with our body. But we also can do that with our feelings. We can, we have an emotional self and we have a spiritual self. We have all these pieces and parts to ourselves that make up you and me. And each of these is a sort of a boundary. So what happens with relationships is that each of us have a set of needs and drives in order for us to move through life. We get hungry, we get tired. We want to be seen. We like to know that we are important, and we'd like to know that people appreciate what we do. So we have awareness of our needs, even drives, like I said, hunger and thirst and need to be safe. Those hungers, needs, drives, all of it, maybe goals, dreams, all of that. And how do we get these needs met when a lot of them have to do in a context of a relationship? We have to manage this in a group setting, in a community, in our society. Well, that's where it gets tricky. We can do it by requesting, but people don't always come through. We can try to negotiate. We can demand. We can, there's all sorts of ways that we can connect in order to get our needs met. And yes, that's a really great question. Someone just asked, is that the start of an attachment disorder? Yes, when we begin to negotiate how we get our needs met, we are then beginning to do a sense of ourselves in the context of other people. And that's when Bowlby and Ainsworth were observing infants with their primary caretaker. They noticed that some infants got really anxious when the mother left the room, and other infants seemed completely withdrawn and apathetic, and others were very edgy and hypervigilant. They noticed there's this variety of display of how infants display their sense of safety, the sense of how they get their needs met in the context of the relationship. And it depends on how this dynamic between caretaker and infant occurs to how healthy. But there's also so many things that occur to us. Like some infants are hardwired with being very sensitive and overwhelmed easily, and other infants are bored and restless and need a lot of interactions. And so there's also connection. So it's not always a failure problem. It could be just not a good connection between the caretakers and infants. But we begin to figure out, how do we get our needs met? So this is where abuse comes in. Abuse comes in when we negotiate for our needs in a way that excludes the respect and care for the needs of those around us. That we don't appreciate that we're interacting with people who have a similar need as our own. We don't see them. We don't even see them. We're actually, in a way, blind to them being people who also have needs to us. Instead, we begin to see the world as sort of like a consumable, just a set of resources for us in order for us to get our needs met. What happens for those of us who don't have good, I would say that's somebody who is rigorously protecting their boundaries. That's what I would call that. But then there's some of us who are not protecting our boundaries well enough, where I would say we're too permeable, too fluid. And in those cases, we have learned that when we set boundaries, there's some form of rejection. It might be that we get ostracized, or we get turned down, or it might be that nothing happens and we end up being dismissed, or but some makes us feel ashamed. Something happens that creates a fear for us to sort of protect or set boundaries. Or maybe we just have been told that's what people shouldn't do. It's just wrong to do that. I've certainly seen that happen as well, is where people live in situations where boundaries have been seen as mean, like inappropriate. I've seen sometimes in extremely religious settings that can be seen like that boundaries just are seen as almost like an affront. It's you can't do that. So for whatever reason, some of us have learned that we need to aggressively pursue our needs, and we're rigorously protect our boundaries to the point that we neglect others and we see them almost as consumables. And then there are those of us who don't protect our boundaries enough because we've been somehow got the message that that to do so is an overreach and is inappropriate. And there's where the toxic mix comes in for relationships, in which, for some of us, we get into these relationships in which we think we're being nice by being kind, by overextending, by giving when we're too tired, by not asking for what we need, for all those types of things. We do that. And then others of us, we have such a fear of loss of control or fear of being intimate, being known, that we then protect ourselves by not getting close, by not dropping our guard, keeping everybody far and distant. Now, I know what I did here is I did not really get into theory, and I kind of talked about this from more of a developmental standpoint, but how does attachment theory tie into boundaries? It kind of does loosely and kind of doesn't. So attachment theory was actually based on, like I said, on two people. It happened around, I think it was really around World War II was when there were these observations. So, we had these orphanages in Europe that were set up because so many children ended up losing parents, and they were warehoused in these big institutions they actually had good care. There were nurses and doctors there, and they were attending to them, but the number of babies to caretakers was so overwhelming. The numbers were that most babies weren't picked up or held, but they were fed and kept dry and kept changed. And what they found in these institutions was that there was a high rate of death. These babies weren't growing. They were losing weight. When infection hit the institutions, they weren't able to overcome it despite the medications. And that's where you get the term failure to thrive. They noticed that infants who weren't, and interestingly, they noticed that infants that were the nurses' favorites that were picked up tended to be the ones who did better than the ones who were not picked up and cared for or weren't the favorites. And that's when they began to realize that there's something connected to us needing to be in contact with another human, that it does something for us nurturing wise. It helps us even regulate ourselves physically. And then they begin to realize that infants are very sophisticated right from the get-go, right from birth, in the ability to read the environment and know whether or not the environment is safe enough for them to explore themselves, explore what's around them, and kind of grow and all of that. So that's where attachment theory came out of it. But one of the things that people assume is because narcissists tend to struggle allowing people to know them. I don't know how many of you got to see the interview I had with Ben Taylor, Raw Motivations, but he said being authentic, being vulnerable, sharing who he really is or was, hopefully he's getting better at it, for him is super scary because it's almost like a self-annihilation to allow someone in like that. Whereas most of us who've had safe experiences in our life, enough of them, we find that being known and having someone see something really tender about us, something sensitive, is actually a good experience. It's pleasant. It's kind of a wonderful feeling. But for those who've had, for whatever reasons, and I know it's easy for you to say, oh, it's because they've had traumatic past or over-controlling parents, or yes, maybe that might be a part of it, but it also is genetically related. All personality traits tend to run in families. For whatever reason, some of us find it more fearful, more intimidating. But here's the part that I know we're going to get to, is that we want to make sense of something that's highly complex. One of the problems we have in psychology is whenever you research something, there's so many variables that interplay and affect that you can't isolate one thing. There isn't one thing that causes narcissism. There isn't one thing that causes some of us to have problems with boundaries. There isn't one thing that causes us to have attachment issues or avoidant issues or disorganized attachment style. There is a myriad of things that kind of come in and interplay that create these dynamics. Our best defense against this is to increase our self-awareness so that we can grow and understand who we are and make changes in the way that we relate so that we're constantly getting healthier. So what does a good boundary look like? Let's circle back to this topic. So what does a really good boundary look like? Good boundaries look like our ability to request for what we need and want in the respect of other people at the same time. And that's hard work because sometimes we'll get what we need. Sometimes we have to delay it. Sometimes it's a blend of both. We have to find some form of compromise. So thank you so much for letting me launch into this today. I always like, for those of you who are new, I tend to start off with a monologue about a topic, and then I slow down and I take your questions. But for right now, I wanted to set the tone for today to talk about abuse and narcissistic abuse and healthy relationships by starting off by talking about boundaries, because it's such an integral part to abuse, an integral part to what we struggle with in getting healthy in these relationships. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for those of you who have followed me. I deeply appreciate it. So again, I'm going to introduce myself and then describe how you can ask me questions, and then let's talk about whatever it is you're interested in talking about. I'm a Dr. Kerry McAvoy. I'm a clinical psychologist with over 20 years of counseling experience, and this platform is a platform where we talk about everything relationship oriented, everything about mental health, but we like to talk a lot about personality disorders here. And I love to take your questions. So how to do it, because it's really tricky, is to put a thumbs up in front of your comments or questions, and that way I know you're talking to me and not talking to each other. And I'm both on Instagram as well as TikTok, and I appreciate everybody who's here hanging out with me today. Thank you so much for that. And if you want to see these lives in its entirety, at 2 o'clock Central Time on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I replay these. They're like one live behind, but I replay these and I hang out and chat. It's not me live, but I'm there and I'm chatting with everybody who happens to show up. So if you miss one of these and you want to hear them, head over at 2 o'clock to YouTube, to my channel, and hang out with me, and I would love that. So what's on your mind that's related to relationships, mental health issues, dysfunctional relationships? How are you all doing? I've been trying to watch the comments while I'm trying to keep my train of thought, so it's really tricky here. So make sure to put a thumbs up so that I know you're talking to me. So Red Skin Cowgirl says, my boyfriend of 10 months fights with me so much lately. I feel like he's emotionally bullying me. I would be curious to know what's triggering him. It sounds like to me he's either irritated, like he feels out of control in some aspect of his life, and you're getting the hangover from it. You're getting the I can't think of the word. You're catching it from something that's going on in his life. But it also could be that the relationship is shifted, and the change in the relationship has caused some concern or fear, and he's using arguments as a way to back you off. So I'm not for sure what it might be, but those are some ideas possibly to why your boyfriend might be suddenly arguing a lot with you. I would say it's either stress and he's using the relationship as a way to sort of blow off the stress, or he's using the arguments as a way to create some distance in the relationship to keep it safer. Sorry that's happening. That's tough. I can see how that would be really tough. So Sweet Pea wants to know, what's the difference between CPTSD and BPD? In other words, complex post-traumatic stress disorder and borderline personality disorder. Well, at a basic level, they're two different syndromes. But I know you're really not asking that, but I have to start there just because they're in two different categories or classifications. Post-traumatic stress disorder and complex post-traumatic stress disorder is considered a mental health disorder. It's a condition, and when people have it, they feel distressed. There's usually a flattening of emotions, a trouble handling emotions. They struggle often with insomnia or nightmares. There's excessive anxiety, but also it could be excessive shutdown from life and dissociation. So it's a response due to a traumatic event, something that we would all consider a traumatic event. But for some of us, the trauma is small. It's the small, like abuse, emotional abuse, may not be registered the same as a surviving an airplane crash, but the chronicness of the abuse will cause CPTSD, even because of the chronicity of it, because of the damage to the self repeatedly over and over, and it builds up and then causes damage. Borderline personality disorder is a personality disorder. That's a separate group. Personality disorders are not mental conditions, they're personality disorders. It's a change in the way the person experiences the world experiences relationship. And borderline personality disorder would be considered chronically unstable personality, meaning they have problems regulating their emotions, handling intensity, regulating relationships. All of that tends to be very, very tricky for them. Now, some have thought, there's some thoughts out there about does trauma cause borderline personality disorder? Because they've noticed that personality disorders tend to have a lot of trauma. They've experienced a lot of it. But that's pretty much been disproven, that there are a lot of us who also have trauma who are not borderline personality disorder. But yet, on the other hand, borderline personality disorders, because of the instability and the impulsivity, sometimes put themselves in harm's way and then end up being abused. Now, that's not shouldn't be their fault. We shouldn't see that as something like a reason to shame them or judge them, but it does create a vulnerability for them. So I hope that kind of answers your question. They're two different things. They often happen together. You often see them together, but there's a lot of borderline personality disorders who doesn't have complex complex post-traumatic stress disorder, but there are also those who have CPSD and who don't have borderline personality disorder. So I hope that helps. I hope that kind of makes sense. But great question, and I appreciate that. Is it possible? There's really a lot of great questions coming in. So I'm trying to go back so that I don't miss any. And I know there was one before this. Does narcissism look different in women than men? And if so, how? Yeah, just because the sexes, the way we've been culturated and what's appropriate, the norms. Yeah, you're going to see, I think women, this is true for antisocial personality disorder as well. Women will tend to use a little more passive aggressive means. They'll tend to use a relationship for control, whether men may just use more power dynamics for control. But they're still the same kind. You will see the same symptoms: grandiosity, envy, competitiveness, exploitation, deceptiveness. You'll see all the same symptoms, but you'll see a female presentation of it rather than a male presentation of it. But but does that make sense? I hope that makes sense about how they kind of present differently. But yes, it occurs in both men and women. And I the question I'm thinking right now is, do the subtypes, because there's like 5 different subtypes, does it present, are women more likely to be some subtypes than others? I'm not for sure. I don't think so. I think that they equally are the same subtypes as men. I don't think women, for example, tend to be more the hero communal type, where men tend to be more malignant. No, I can think of malignant women. So I don't think that changes anything. So, but great question. I love that. Can I discuss infidelity in marriage? At this point, this person says we're just living like roommates. So infidelity happens for a lot of complex reasons. I'm going to talk about infidelity now between two people who are not personality disorders. Neither one of them have a personality disorder, because I think when you add a personality disorder in, you've got a very different dynamic. So let's talk about it in a context of what was once a healthy marriage that somehow is now coming apart, and infidelity is happening as a result of that. I'd be curious, by the way, the one who asked me this question, and I know I'm way down on messages, but who was the one who was unfaithful? Was it you or was it your partner? I'd be kind of curious about that. Maybe you don't feel comfortable sharing that. I understand if you don't. It often happens when there's a disconnection between each other. Men tend to pursue it for different reasons than women do, but both of them are pursuing it to get gratification that they're not finding in the relationship that they should be finding in the relationship. If you want to check out some great work on this, look at John Gottman's work, John and Julie Gottman of the Gottman Institute. They found that there's like a whole set of betrayals, like the relationship starts to have difficulties early. There's early signs. He says there's something like 20 to 24 signs that you're moving towards infidelity, that are like slight betrayals that occur way before anybody ever steps out on the relationship. So it would be, you might find that interesting. I'm going to check that out. I'm going to look that up, because that would be a great topic to talk about here, is what are the early signs that we all may be at risk for infidelity in our marriage? So how can we keep ourselves healthy? But there's sort of a set of betraying of the connection and trust to each other that happens in very slight ways. like not stepping in for each other, not defending, like not responding to each other's needs. I mean, there's all sorts of things that sort of happen that end up are precursors to the actual breach. Interestingly enough, a lot of marriages make it through infidelity. You'd be surprised. It was a common problem when I was seeing clients. And I was surprised the number of clients who stuck it out and stuck together. It takes a lot of hard work. There's accountability, ownership that the person who did the infidelity has to do to kind of create healing and safety back in the relationship. And then you have to repair whatever happened between the two people that resulted in the breach, why they emotionally stopped looking to each other. So yeah, it's amazing to me the number of relationships that are able to withstand it. But the fact that you're saying you're living like roommates to me says that that's not happening, which I would express a lot of concern. I would really urge the two of you to get into counseling to look at those things. But let's talk about infidelity in the context of a narcissistic personality disorder or an antisocial personality disorder, because that's a completely different thing. What's happening there is individuals who are narcissistic or sociopathic, psychopathic, is that they don't look to their partners for intimacy. As I said, everybody's a consumable. And as a result, sex is just one more way for them to meet their needs. So they don't see themselves as owing any allegiance to anyone. Their allegiance is always primarily to themselves. So it's to them, they see it as their right. They're entitled to this. So in fact, I've even heard them say, what my partner doesn't know, it won't hurt them. I mean, that's literally the blindness they have to the context of it. So in that situation, to say that the partner is responsible for the breach in the marriage when they don't even know that they're in a relationship with someone who doesn't see themselves as really in a relationship or owes that kind of exclusivity to the partner is wrong. We can't look at infidelity in the context of that kind of a marriage in the same way that we would look at infidelity in more of a healthy marriage. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. I don't see them as the comment to say it takes two to tango. Yes, that's a fair statement when we're talking about marriages who are just growing distant. But when you're talking about somebody who's in a narcissistically abusive relationship, and to say it takes two to tango, that's inappropriate and you're victim blaming. It's a completely different mindset. I'm going to take a question over here on Instagram. I know you guys have been really patient and I don't mean to be ignoring you, but Laura wants to know, I'm in therapy learning how to set boundaries in my family, career, finances, friends, relationships, literally in every arena in my life. So how do I push through the fear of loss in my family? That's the tough part. I know for those who are just joining me, probably didn't hear me start out today. I was talking about how boundaries, how we express ourselves, our needs in relationship by protecting ourselves through the use of boundaries. And one of the when there are a type of family called an enmeshed family, which uses connection as a way to soothe itself in stressful situations. So think of chickens when a fox is trying to get into the hen house, they clump together like a group. Some of us, in some contexts, some relationships, we clump together and we lose our sense of self in that by doing that, become like one big ego mass. It's called undifferentiated ego mass. Isn't that a great word? And in those families, individuality and autonomy is ostracized. So when you begin to hold your ground and to separate yourself, there is consequences. There is real consequences. They will push back on you for that. So are you, Laura, in a family like that? I don't know. You may not be, and they may be able to support you really well, but you may be in a family where you're going to get anger for you having better boundaries. But then it comes back to this. This is the question I would ask you. So it's not really about so much, can you preserve your connection to the family and it stay the way that you want it to, because they may not allow you to get healthy and do that. But the question is, can you hold on to your sense of value to know that you're worth setting the limit. You're worth the boundaries, even if it does cost you something. I think that's a way maybe to help you settle the fear about that. But it's real. I want you to know that I do really believe that it's real. Lila wants to know, in regards to reactive abuse, can you help with giving me some pointers on how I can manage my reaction to the abuse from my narcissistic husband? That's really common. I don't know how many, I know for me, I started picking up some of my narcissistic husband's habits as well, partly defensively, the nastiness was so bad, I wanted to sort of protect myself, give him maybe a taste of his own medicine. But partly I just got, fatigued. The whole thing was exhausting to live that long with somebody. I wasn't living with him very long, but it's exhausting. So here's the hard part. What I'm going to tell you is the antithesis of what I would say if you want a healthy relationship. This is not what you guys do to maintain a healthy relationship with someone. You need to become emotionally distant and emotionally detached, so that when they lose it, when the toxic person in your life just loses it, whether it's a partner, family member, friend, neighbor, whoever, that you cease to care about their opinion in the way that it makes a difference to you in the quality of your life and in your mental space. Like, you don't need them anymore. You don't need their approval. You don't need their feedback. You don't need their attention and love. You begin to emotionally divorce yourself from that before you actually have divorced yourself. So that's how you can protect yourself from being reactive, is to get the distance. Think of it, for example, if you're ever say you've been around a neighbor's kid, 3-year-old, who's losing it. It's not your kid. They're losing it. They're at your house. In fact, they're at your house playing. Do you feel very emotionally invested in that? No, you don't. You don't care. This kid's having a fit that they don't get the candy bar they want. You don't really care, because you don't have any connection to this person. You're just sort of impassionately watching what's happening. That's how you handle an abusive person, is you get to the place where you get dispassionate, you cease to care. Now, I want to warn you though, some toxic people, especially if they're more on the antisocial spectrum, they're higher up, they'll notice your distance and their detachment, and it will anger them. So please be very, very careful that you know who you're doing this with, and you don't reveal an emotion that puts you at greater risk. So you may have to act like it bothers you, but emotionally inside it doesn't. So just be aware you may have to be a bit strategic in this in order to keep yourself safe. I'm going to jump back over to TikTok. Yeah, so someone said, I'm desperate for one-on-one counseling. I don't counsel these days. I do offer one-on-one clarity calls where I see you one time and give you some direction. I can point you in some direction of some good therapists or counselors or coaches in the United States. Some of them are not in the United States. So I actually know a few, internationally, but they all do digital work, all online work. But we also can just kind of form a direction, or maybe you want an assessment, or you want just a professional opinion. I do offer those. You can see it through the link in my bio, but I don't offer counseling these days. Is it possible to fall back in love with someone that you're afraid to because of past hurts? Absolutely. It's always absolutely to fall back in love. Absolutely. It's going to probably take twofold. I'm thinking of two parts of this challenge. Part of it is your own work with understanding your fear of what it is you think is going to happen to you if you let your guard down. And then to realistically work through that, assuming this is a safe person. I'm assuming this is a safe person in your life. So that's the first part, is to work through why you're afraid and do some healing around it. And you may want to do some EMDR. It does a really great job with decoupling the intensity, the emotional intensity from the memory, and giving you way more control over it, so you're not so triggered and dysregulated around trauma. So I would highly recommend that you check that out. And then the other thing is to begin to show attention to this person, because here's the trick about love. And I've helped a lot of couples with this. I used to do couples therapy too. When we fall out of love with someone, and it happens in every relationship. Relationships go through periods where we feel this connection, and then we feel periods of where we grow apart, partly because of challenges of life or work demands or kids' demands. But the way to get it back is that you have to be the one to initiate. We often wait for our partner to show up, to show attention to us. And we do that. They won't, because they're feeling distant from us. And I know it feels unfair. It feels very unfair. But usually we're the ones that have to go out and make an effort. Show kindness to them. Do something small that says that you're thinking of them. Make set time aside and check in with them. And like a snowball, this starts to get bigger and bigger and have bigger consequences. And you start to feel a warmness and a tenderness towards them. And interestingly, when they're healthy people, they'll start to do it back to you. It becomes a reciprocal thing that starts to feed itself. It's a feedback loop. So if you start the feedback loop, they'll return it. And it just it rewards itself and keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The reason we don't do that is because it feels sacrificial and it's outside our comfort zone, and it feels terribly unfair because we feel like we're starving to death and we really wish they'd show up, and we're angry that they're not showing up. There's where what gets in our way a lot from making this happen and healing around this. So it takes a lot of hard work on our part. It does. But if you do it, it's amazing how much better things get. Okay, I lost my spot. It jumped me forward 90 comments. So I know I'm going to miss some of you guys who've asked a question way back there, and I apologize for this. Dr. Moses John Roderick. Thank you for, Roderick. I'm sorry, I'm saying your name wrong. I know that. Thank you so much. I'm glad you're finding this is helpful. I'll have to check out your platform. I'll try to remember your name or make sure that I, say something to me so that we can connect. I know there are other therapists on here. There's a guy out of Mexico. He speaks in Spanish, so I like to watch him to practice my Spanish, but he talks about healthy male and female relationships, and I love the fact that he's down in Mexico City educating. It's just really wonderful. And there's another therapist I catch that out of Mexico who does a lot of great work. So, I appreciate us therapists here doing what kind of help that we can, where we can. So, Forever Questioning wants to know, how do we heal from CPTSD when you're frozen and shut down and you can't sleep? It's interesting. I've been reading this book. I know it's right here because I'm getting ready. I'm getting ready for Isn't Having Sex My Right? It's October 20th. It's a panel of experts. There's a sexologist, myself. So there's two therapists, I think, psychologists, doctor, lover, psychologists. There's also a pastor. There's a reformed dad, and there's also a woman who's experienced a lot of sexual coercion in her relationship. So there's a group of us going to be talking about sexual coercion. So I've been reading this book. Oops, upside down. I've been reading Dr. Emily Nagoski's book. Oh, and I turned on music and didn't mean to do that. I've been reading Emily Nagoski's book, Come As You Are. Highly, highly recommend this. She is a psychologist, sexologist. This is a best-selling book. And she talks about, why am I talking about stress and you're talking about sex, is because she talks about, a lot of us use sex as a way to distract from stress. That stress is often a failure to complete the stress cycle. That's how she talks about it. It's fascinating. So yes, you get frozen and shut down and you get stuck, and that's why you're not able to sleep. Your amygdala, your fight or flight system is stuck, and it's stuck in this overactive state, and as a result you can't relax and then move through it. So that's what you need help with, is to get it unstuck. So how do you do that? Well, you need to do something that kind of does a mind-body connection, something that like going for a walk when you feel really upset and frozen and can't sleep. Stay away from mobile devices at least an hour plus before you go to bed. Don't be on your phone and don't be on the computer, because the blue lights is going to cause problems with trying to fall asleep. Have a ritual that you use every night that you do before you go to bed that will help signal to the body that you're getting ready to go to sleep. Do things like yoga, art therapy, maybe I know massages are expensive, but it can be very, very helpful. But you need to do something that helps your body get unstuck and finish the stress cycle that you've gotten frozen and stuck in. And probably, I hate to say this because it may struggle with the financing, but I would really recommend counseling. I think anybody who's trained with trauma treatment would be very effective with helping you move through this so that you can begin to heal and your body can learn to unwind so you can relax. Great question. My husband is a functioning alcoholic who won't quit and is verbally and mentally abusive when he's drunk. Now, if you guys have been on my platform any length of time, I hate the word codependent. I hate it. It does not define anything. It is not a clinical term. It came out of addiction model, and Melanie Beatty was the first, I think, to coin it. Maybe not, but we all know her book, Codependency No More. But it fits here. What happens is when we have someone who has an addiction and who's not managing it, their life becomes chaotic, and it makes our life chaotic, and it makes us unsafe and puts us in danger. So we begin to manage them as a way to manage our safety. And when we do that, we become codependent to them, codependent to the illness. And it makes us ill in response. But it makes sense. I understand why you're doing it. You're doing it to keep yourself safe. But unfortunately, all it does is it stabilizes the addiction. You have made him functional so that there's no reason for him to get help or to do anything different. Because if you think about it, why does any of us ever change? What motivates change in your life? Usually, something has to go terribly wrong. For me, I had 2 hip surgeries in the last year. My weight started ballooning. My pain level was going up. The consequence of getting out of health was getting so bad that I had to do something, which any of you who've been following me know that I'm on a fitness journey. So that resulted in me in saying, whoa, the pain of this is too much. I need to take responsibility. So that's what I've been doing. So the hard part of this is that you backing out of his life is going to increase the chaos in your life. But if you can know that and be prepared for it and set up whatever it is that you need to set up, I would emotionally, mentally, physically back out of his life and see what happens. Let him see if that he hits bottom and see if it starts to motivate him in order to get better. Because unfortunately, the way things are right now, I hate to tell you this, it's not going to change. There's no reason for it to change. It's become stably dysfunctional. It's stable. So there's no reason for him to do anything better, do anything different. Terrible situation. I know it's a terrible situation. And what can I do? How do I know if he's a narcissist? Well, if and this is the same person talking about the the alcohol. I don't know if he's a narcissist. They've done studies. I heard this in relationship to opioids, those who are abusing prescription drugs. It's applicable to all addictions, not just to opiates, but they found that the people who are in the throes of the addiction had a lot of the same presentations as personality disorders. But what they found is when these people stopped using, got clean, was really working the program, and interestingly enough, their personality characteristics that you saw that looked like a personality disorder cleared up. They actually became back to who they once were and were really great people again, really nice people, really healthy people. So I can't say to you if he's a narcissist or not. I'm sure his entitlement and the addictions making him behave very narcissistic. I'm sure of that. But I don't know that he's a narcissist. I don't know who he was before he started using. So, oh, thank you. I see you guys talking. Yes, because Bree's been talking about my resources. I am right now doing the beta testing on the online course, but I'm coming back confident enough. I have gone ahead and I have launched it. So who is this for? I just launched a book. I don't have an example, but I'll soon have one to show you. It's called First Steps to Leaving a Narcissist. So it's a course with a companion workbook that's digital, but I also have a print version of it. The best way to work this course is to do it with the workbook, which gives you space to write your answers, but also gives you some extra exercises and resources. So they're very close to each other, but they're not perfectly the same. So the best recourse would be to buy both the workbook and the course. But who is this for? It's for who I was about 5-6 years ago. If you're in a relationship and you're feeling fuzzy and you don't know what to do and you don't even know what's going on and you don't know why you can't leave, this is the course that will help you. It's called First Steps to Leaving a Narcissist. It's going to help you break the cognitive dissonance, the confusion that you're feeling in order to make a decision. It's going to help you understand why you can't make a decision and how to begin to break it so that you can then resolve the trauma bond, resolve the confusion, all of that. It's like a domino. It's the first step to getting out. if you want to, but the first step to really breaking through the confusion. So it's officially launched. You can find a link in my bio. I'm so excited about this, guys. It includes psychological questions and exercise. It's like being in therapy. It will really, and I hope you can take your time to work through it so that you can benefit from it and really ponder the questions, because I ask tough stuff. I really, I ask you to dig deep in it. So if you guys are looking for help, really strongly consider that. Again, there's a print version you can get on Amazon. I haven't loaded it up everywhere else yet, but I will eventually have it in Barnes & Noble and everywhere else that sells books. But the digital version is fillable, it's interactable, and it's on my website. And then there's the course with videos and material, and with more, it has more material where I go into greater depth about things. So yeah, first steps to leaving a narcissist. I'm so excited about it. Thank you, Brittany, for reminding me about that. I appreciate that. I'm thumbing through the questions to see what have come up. And some of you may have noticed, by the way, some of you are subscribers, and I'm going to be doing a subscriber live on Saturday. So everybody who's a subscriber, I will, because you guys have that little special badge, I can see you. Anybody who's a subscriber will get to first dibs. We'll talk about what you want to talk about. I will handle this differently. I will not come in. I will come in and I'm hanging out with you. I'm hanging out with subscribers. So that's Saturday afternoon. So I can't wait to do that with you guys. It's gonna be so much fun. So someone asked, can you explain competitiveness in a relationship? My husband's competitive with me. Yes. This is a common feature with personality disorders, especially with narcissism. So what's happening? Why are they competitive? And you'll notice it's not only competitive, they're envious. It's envy that's fueling the competition. Now, so what's happening? So if you have an entitled worldview, if you believe that you're owed and you're special and you're above everybody and above it all, then you think everything should be rolling your way. So when it doesn't, when somebody else gets something you think you should have gotten, whether it's money, attention, the job, other people's affection, whatever it is, then you're going to compete with that person to get it because you think by right it's yours and it's unfair they have it. That's why the DSM-5 lists one of the 9 criteria as enviousness. Narcissists are chronically envious. They're jealous of what you have. They think it's unfair that you have it. Now, you would say, but we love each other. Shouldn't they see that, be happy for me? Because if I'm happy in a good space, then we're rewarded as a couple. Because, for example, if I'm making more money because I got a good raise, doesn't that benefit everybody? It benefits what's coming into the household. Well, but see, they still think that they're special. And no, they don't see it that way. They don't have this mentality of, I have your back, you have my back. It's competitive. They see themselves literally at war with the world, and everybody is a part of the world. You're not a part of them. You're separate from them, and they see themselves as in competition with you forever. That never changes with personality disorders, particularly with narcissism. It never changes. They have a need to be right, and they have a need to be the one that comes out on top consistently. So they will always have this competition with you. It is strange. I agree. And to me, I find it heartbreaking because they're really missing out on something lovely by treating relationships this way. So I hope that helps with understanding why it is. Unfortunately, it's not something you can heal. I wish it is something that you could get better about, but it just isn't. So my subscriber, Nina, wants to know, what's the best advice on managing IMO, healing your inner wounds that connects to you? It's interesting that buzzword inner wounds or inner childs becomes very, very popular. As a psychologist, I don't tend to think of it that way because all of us, your basic structure, every single one of us, every person I'm seeing here, almost 170 of you between 2 platforms, you all, the way you deal with the world was put in play by the age of 5. You are who you are, and the way you see the world is been there because of from age of 5. Your sense of how safe the world is, how much you can kind of reveal about yourself, how you manage your boundaries, how you get your needs met, what feelings you're comfortable experiencing, all of that got kind of set. So how do we break out of that? How do we mature and grow and get beyond the stage of age 5? Well, it's by doing a lot of in-depth work and being terribly honest with yourself and realizing that the hunger that you have, the innate needs that you have that are wounds or holes, to me mine feels like more hunger or holes, are things that you need to find a way to heal for yourself. Here's a technique that my therapist told me years ago, and it has helped me so much. It really has helped me so much. So I'm going to share it with you guys. She says, when you have a feeling, ask yourself, whatever the feeling is this old feeling? Like, have I felt this way, way back and it's very, very familiar to me? Or is it a new feeling? Old feelings are going to be wounds and unhealed hungers within them. They're coming out of that unhealed child within us. And they'll feel very raw and very familiar. New feelings are things that are happening because of life and stress, and those you'll find those very manageable. You'll find those easy. But if it's an old feeling, if you answer the question of, oh, this is an old feeling, then her next part of her instruction was to say to me, she said, then I want the mother within you, or the father, or the loving person within you to come close to that wounded part of you inside you and hold it and comfort it, reassure it, show up for it. It has been so helpful. I have found that so helpful. So I'd love to hear you try that and see if that makes a difference, to see if that really, really helps. Okay, I'm still working through that. Yeah, so the same person brought up relationships with narcissists usually have trauma bonds, and once your trauma bond heals, they can't get to you. Well, that's a great observation. Trauma bonds, however, aren't just inner child wounds, though. Trauma bonds, this is what a trauma bond is. Trauma bond is anytime you go through something that's fear-based, fear-bonded, you're in a dangerous situation, and you're depending on other people to make it through the dangerous situation. So you count on them, you look to them, you look for reassurance. What happens with abusive people is they do both. They're the ones that wound you, but at the same time, they're then come through and they give you support from the wounding. I know I've had that happen where it's very bizarre. You feel like you're the one that just chewed me out and now you're comforting me for crying, or now you're getting me a gift because now I'm, you get this weird mixed message, but it's this intermittent reinforcement in the inconsistency and them being the ones that hurt you, but you need them, that creates the trauma bond. So how do you break the trauma bond? You break the trauma bond by resolving the cognitive dissonance. And that's why I feel that course is so imperative, because the confusion of, is this a good person or bad person, is what causes us being stuck. It becomes literally, our mind becomes paralyzed by what's real. We don't know what's real. Are they good? Is this good? Is things going to get better? Should I stay? Should I leave? I don't know, because it's going to be so hard if I leave. It's that confusion then makes it hard for you to release the connection you have with this person so that you can move on. But trauma bonds they're not a result of inner wounds. Yeah, inner wounds probably make us more vulnerable, but trauma bonds is what happens with this person. Now, could you have a trauma bond from way back with a parent or a sibling? Yeah, absolutely. So you could have multiple trauma bonds and be vulnerable to trauma bonds, but the development of a trauma bond is because of the inconsistent, crazy relationship. I hope that makes sense, because I've sensed lately out here on TikTok, and not so much on Instagram, but on TikTok, there's this confusion that trauma bonds is related to trauma histories. And they're not. They're related to the crazy, inconsistent relationships that we get into with these toxic people. But we can have multiple trauma bonds. I had trauma bonds with my family members, and then I developed a trauma bond with my first husband. Even though he wasn't abusive, I still had it with him. And then I ended up having a big trauma bond with this last guy, to the point that I was very, very fearful of leaving. Very, very fearful of he's setting limits. Great question. I'm going to hop up. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to bump the mic. I'm going to hop over to Instagram and answer the question over here. And then I'll take one more on TikTok before I wrap it up. And I'll be back on Saturday on TikTok, not on Instagram, just on TikTok, for subscribers only. But everybody else can hang out, but I'm going to be talking to subscribers. So I'm trying to see if there's any questions I missed over here on Instagram. I guess no, I guess I caught up. So... And I'm trying to think of I'm backing up, making sure I don't miss anything here. How is it true? I know that Ariel, you're probably talking about something that I missed. How is it true the way we see the world's always changing? Yeah, because hopefully we're all growing. Well, we're not all, we're always changing. Our perspective is changing. Okay, so let me give you an example. Partly just because we're changing. Even our body's changing. The way our body changes the way we see things. So when you were little and you walked into the school seemed really huge, right? Seemed big, just big. Classroom seemed big, teachers seemed big. Felt like it was, walking through the halls went for forever. And have you been back to the school since you've been an adult? You're going to see how small it is. It's tiny. It was not anywhere near the size of that. I remember back thinking about how time moved when I was a kid. Time moved. I thought every day was an eternity because I didn't have a real sense of like watching my clock, and it just felt really slow. And now that I'm adult, man, time feels like it moves super fast. So there's a lot that changes our perspective, but yet still the way when I said we're stuck at 5, what I mean, I should have said, we're stuck at psychologically how we defend ourselves and protect our ego is sort of like a 5-year-old, and we make assumptions about the safety of the world kind of based on a 5-year-old's perspective. So if we came up in a home that primarily was pretty safe and reasonable, we probably have a pretty carefree experience of the world. We probably see it as a pretty good place. And if we were able to say what we needed when we were little, we probably are pretty good at saying what we need now. That's what I meant. I didn't mean that we do see things differently. So I appreciate it. And you guys have really liked this wig, I see. I like it too. I like the color of it. It's got it's called chocolate cherry. That's what it's called. So if you notice, it's got dark undertones underneath. So yeah, I love how it flows. It flows really, really pretty. So thank you for the comments on that. Well, this has really been fun to hang out with you guys. I appreciate this so much. I'll be back on Saturday. And that's, like I said, I'm dedicating that live to subscribers, but I also will be happy to talk to the rest of you, but subscribers will be first. Otherwise, I'll be back here as my normal on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I can't wait to see you guys then. And thanks, Brittany. So thank you. And I thank you to my mods. I know I have mods kind of wrangling all of you. I really, really appreciate it. And Brittany, I want to connect with you. I think I should start planning some polls. We can do it together because I love what you do with the engagement you have with the audience. So I'll be in touch with you about that. So you guys are awesome. Don't forget to check out my podcast. The new episodes are today, is Mondays and Thursdays every week. And then also I'm over on YouTube. I have a new YouTube where my eyelash is coming off and I'm so embarrassed. So watch to see if you can catch my eyelash falling off in the whole thing. But I did a blind reaction to Kylan and Jason's labor. Kylan and Jason from TLC Unexpected. I did a blind reaction to their labor. That's now on YouTube. So I will see you guys